Hi, I'm Virginia from Right Clinic, and here with me today is Alex Howson, PhD, medical writer, and host of the Right Medicine podcast. Thank you for being here today, Alex.
I'm happy to be here, Virginia. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. So let's start with what do you do and how did you get into it?
Well, I am a medical writer who specializes in creating continuing education content for health professionals, mostly accredited continuing education. And I've been doing that for almost 20 years. Before that, I was a trauma OR nurse at a regional trauma center and an academic for about a decade. And I got into medical writing in general around about, I don't know, 2006, because actually I moved with my family from the UK to the US, and that's a major undertaking. I had young kids at the time. And so I was trying to look for, work that I could do that didn't involve a huge commute. So very long story short, found medical writing, and it seemed to be a really good spot for the skill set that I had at the time, which was writing research and teaching. And joined the American Medical Writers Association. At the time, they were consistently running a workshop on writing CME materials, hosted by Eve Wilson, who still runs that workshop. And I realized once I'd learned a little bit more about continuing medical education that it was a really good place for me to be, because it really bridges that space between healthcare delivery, clinical practice, and education. And that's where I've kind of been, all my life, healthcare and education in my professional life. So that is how I found CME. And unlike a lot of advice out there, and unlike a lot of the experience of people who do find their way into freelance medical writing, I went freelance right away, and started to kind of build up an independent CME writing business. And I've been doing that ever since.
Amazing. So I think just to reiterate, if you do go straight into freelancing, there's also nothing wrong with that. You can make it work, but I'm sure that you have to be quite determined to make it work as well. And if you have a family, and if there's more than one of you earning an income, living together, then I suppose that would make things easier as well, because that was definitely the case for me when we moved from the UK to Germany, and my partner was working full time at school, and I was trying to figure out a new career, and again trying to find a career that I could do in English but without a commute, because I can speak German, and we were new to the country. So well done for keeping that up for so many years. So for our listeners who don't know what CME is, could you just explain a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So CME goes by a number of different terms. You'll hear continuing medical education, continuing education for health professionals, which is what I said at the top of the conversation, continuing professional development, lifelong learning. And there are subtle differences between all of these things, but essentially continuing medical education is education for physicians and pharmacists, that they need, as part of their licensure, their ongoing relicensure and maintenance of certification. And in the US, certainly every state mandates a certain number of CME credits every year. Continuing education for health professionals, or continuing education, is education for nurses and other health professionals who also need credits for licensure and maintenance of, really licensure. And then continuing professional development and lifelong learning. These are opportunities for education and learning and skill development that aren't necessarily tied to any sort of credit system. There's accredited CME, and that is education that is accredited by bodies such as the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education in the US, and there are at least 7 other accreditation bodies for different health professional designations. There's also non-accredited education, which is as I kind of previewed a minute ago, independent education, which is not really for credit, but it still contributes to knowledge building, skill development, lifelong learning. Accredited education is one more kind of point of distinction here. Accredited education is very independent from the pharmaceutical industry. We can talk about that if you want to. Non-accredited education can be company-led, it can be pharmaceutical-led, but it's still independent. It's not mentioning promotion. It's not promotional. It's not mentioning products in a promotional way, therapies, devices, those kinds of things. So it's quite a complex field. It's a little bit subterranean, and there are a lot of different distinctions to get your head around.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot from that description, because I always have thought of continuing medical education as CPD in the UK, because I have to do a CPD every year. I have to fill out like 8 or 9 case studies as a pharmacist if I want to maintain my registration. And I know that they have to do that for doctors and nurses as well, like you said. And so what kind of clients would you say are most looking for that type of medical writing? And how did you kind of get your foot in the door to discover those clients and work for them? And are they likely to be longer term clients, because this is something that's kind of continuous? Do you kind of create something and then you just update it every year? What's the kind of life cycle of the work that you do? Sorry, it's a bit of a loaded question.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are your clients and what's the life cycle of the work like?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I get to that, you raised an important point about CPD there. I'm based in the United States. In the United Kingdom, as you say, continuing professional development is the kind of umbrella term for some of the things that we do in a US basis. And in Europe, it's different again, and in other parts of the globe. So CME is global, but there are lots of distinctions and different approaches to what that is and how it's delivered and to whom and when and how it's funded and all those sorts of things. In terms of my own experience, the types of the types of work that you can get to do in CME, I'll start with there because it's a kind of good segue into what kind of clients ask for this type of work. In the US, at least, includes things like, needs assessments. We'll come back to that. That's a very common type of deliverable that you might be asked to provide as a freelance or as an in-house CME writer. Monographs are still around, but not as much as they used to be. So written text that kind of tells a story about new developments in a particular field or a disease state or a therapy or new standards of care. It's not all just therapy focused. It's very much accredited CME is very much focused on standards of care and applying new information and new standards to clinical practice. So monographs, now I would say there are more opportunities for micro-learning pieces, so much shorter pieces of educational content that might be text-based. They might be text-based combined with patient cases, online or in a live education session. Things like poster and journal abstracts, interactive patient cases. As a pharmacist, you'll be very familiar with the importance of patient cases as teaching techniques, as modalities. And so CME writers, are involved in creating patient cases in collaboration with faculty, video and podcast scripts, and other deliverables like outcomes reports. So once an education has gone through its full planning cycle, an education activity has gone through its whole planning cycle, and we've come to the end of the activity, now it's time to kind of gather and analyze that data so that the planners, the education providers understand what's worked and why it's worked. And writers often work on those outcomes reports and things like manuscripts and white papers as well. So there's a whole range of deliverables that we can work on as CME writers. Like a lot of freelance writers in this particular specialty, my sort of break-in was through needs assessments. As I mentioned, it's a very common type of deliverable. It's a document and a process for really laying the foundation, the rationale for why a particular education activity is necessary. And in a needs assessment, you're laying out, you're uncovering clinical and performance practice gaps, creating a story around those gaps, and um, arguing for the need for education. And so the types of clients who require those deliverables are, for the most part, called medical education companies. Education providers they might be publishing companies, they might be standalone education providers. They often work in partnership with medical societies, associations, nonprofit foundations. There's a lot of partnership and collaboration in this world, in this field. But they are the commonest category of education provider who needs assessments specifically. You can learn about who those providers are from the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education's provider list. And so that's one of the things I did, was look at that list and see who education providers are and start knocking on doors. That's what I did. I sent emails, I connected with people on LinkedIn. I went to the Alliance for Continuing Education in the Health Professions conference every year to connect with people face to face and start conversations and say to them, one of my goals is to work with you. Let's have a conversation. And so that's pretty much how I kind of broke into the field, and then expanded to other types of deliverables, and have specialized in particular in manuscripts and white papers and patient cases.
Amazing. Thank you. So what do you know now that you wish you knew earlier?
Well, I think the challenge with, people say this with medical writing in general, it's hard to understand what the whole world encompasses. I think even when you narrow down into a specialty area like CME, and I am a huge proponent of niching down, but even when you do that within CME, I mentioned earlier, it's still a little subterranean. It's very challenging. I found it very challenging. I know other people find it challenging to kind of get your head around what the field is, who are the key players, what do they do, what are their roles and responsibilities, who do I need to be in touch with, who are the decision makers, what types of deliverables do these education providers require, how do I find them, all of these things. It took me a very long time to figure that stuff out piece by piece. I would say that there still isn't really a straightforward, there are no clear pathways into CME for writers or for other professionals who end up in this field. And that's everyone kind of knows that. The field has been professionalizing for about 15 years, and that's a little bit better, but it's still quite challenging for people to find their way around. So I think, if there's one thing I wish had been different, was shortening that curve, shortening that path to kind of starting off writing in this field, to getting the first client, to understanding what my options were within CME itself. I never really wanted to do other types of medical writing. I didn't want to be in regulatory. I knew that from the start. I had dabbled in consumer health a little bit. I knew I wanted to be in CME, but it was just kind of difficult to figure out what that path looked like. So that's definitely one thing I wish I had known more about at the beginning, because it would have shortened some of the very long and winding paths that, inevitably you end up on.
Great. So I think that, for anyone that is thinking about CME, and if it sounds interesting to you, if you're listening or watching this, then would definitely recommend you reach out to Alex and find out more about what she's doing and see what she offers in order to guide you, to help you get into that faster rather than, again, trying to figure it out yourself. And so I guess the last question is, what's next on the horizon for you? Where do you see yourself going now?
Well, I have a book coming out later in 2024. I had to check for a minute, but this is 2024, right?
Yes.
I have a book coming out later this year called CME Roadmap, How to Break into CME with No Experience, No Network, and No Clue, because that's pretty much where I started. And the book is essentially you're trying to lay out that path and provide information about what you need to know in order to put your kind of stake in the ground as a CME writer, whether you're working freelance, whether you're working in-house. So that's the next big thing. I'm speaking at an American Medical Writers Association conference, the Pacific Coast Conference in June, and continuing to support my professional development membership, CME Pro, and of course host the Right Medicine podcast, which is a very core part of the resources that I offer to people who are interested in CME.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I know how much hard work a podcast is. So it's really nice to have spoken with you today and share a podcast moment as well. It must be quite interesting to be on the other side. So it's quite nice to do a podcast with someone else who knows what it's like to do a podcast. So I really appreciate your time today, and I'm sure that, I mean, I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that the audience that have been listening in or watching have also learned a lot and have found out about CME as a possible path into medical writing if, kind of the commercial or marketing side or maybe the regulatory side isn't really an option for them. But I'm sure that CME kind of intertwines with the same kind of clients for those as well. So don't be afraid to reach out and offer those kind of services if that is what you want to do. So thank you so much. And it would be nice to invite you in future so that we could talk about the success of your book, I'm sure. So I'll leave links in the description below to everything that Alex wants to share with you. So follow on LinkedIn, listen to the Right Medicine podcast as well. So that's everywhere you can find podcasts. So YouTube, Spotify, and everywhere else. And I'll leave a link to that too. And I'm sure you can find out more about the CME book as well. So thank you so much, Alex.
Thanks for having me, Virginia. I really appreciate it. It's been good talking to you.
Thank you. Likewise. All right. See you next time. Bye.